Well, greetings in the name of Jesus. As I was preparing for this message, well, actually, it was after I thought I had studied through it and had it down, I realized that in studying for it, I feel like God answered a question that I'd been just really wrestling over for a long time. A question about the apparent paradox of grace and works. It's something that I've personally just tripped over for a long time, it seems like, and just could not get a lot of resolution on the subject. How do we properly place what we do in the context of our lives and in the context of God's grace to us and the necessity of God making us holy? The conclusion that I came to as I thought about it, aiming higher, working to surrender my sinful impulse is not what makes me whole. Used to we would have said holy, but that word has connotations that I'm not sure it quite captures it for my generation. Working to deal with our sinful impulse doesn't make us whole. It's simply a proper response to God's grace and a living confession that I am sinful, as opposed to making a claim that I'm comfortable in my sin, implying that I'm fine. When we realize that we have sinful impulses or that we give in to sinful impulses, there's not a neutral place that we can be. Either we're going to be comfortable with it, or we're going to have to try to deal with it. And we're making a claim about who we are before God. We're making an announcement, so to speak, that I'm okay. In spite of what God says, it's okay for me to sin. If we're going to improperly apply grace to sin in our lives, I imply that I'm fine. It's the rest of reality that needs to conform to me. In other words, I'm not broken. It's everybody else. It's everything else. It's God. So it was helpful to me. I hope that communicated what it communicated to me about the necessity of dealing with sin, of our relationship to sin in our lives, placing it properly, dealing with it properly, and understanding it doesn't save us, but it is a confession. Just the act of seeking God and seeking God's strength to resolve sinfulness in our lives, sinful appetites. Any way that sin works out in us, we've seen in our Sunday school lesson, there was some examples of how sin can be expressed in our lives. Any way that sin is working out in us, our response to that tells us what we believe about who we are before God. It was very helpful to me to have what I believe is a healthier motivation to deal with sin. It's not about me. It's not about me trying to be good enough to please God. It's about me acknowledging who God is, His holiness, and my sinfulness. Thank you. And if you have more clarifying thoughts on it, or if I'm wrong, like I said, it's been a subject that's caused me a lot of searching and seeking, and it's unlikely that my understanding of it can't be polished further. So I welcome that, and perhaps there's something about it that's wrong, and I welcome correction on that. Okay, I want to look into the message. Hopefully, as we go through the message, that conclusion, hopefully that conclusion will speak to you as well. I wanted to look at the second half of Hebrews chapter 12, verses 18 through 29. I feel like I need to go back and place where we're at in Hebrews a little bit. This was a letter written to Jewish people. They had experienced life under the Old Covenant. The title of the message is The Superior Covenant. The writer of this chapter is inviting the inviting the Jewish people that he's writing to not become entangled in the old covenant again, reminding them of some of the terribleness of the old covenant, to use language similar to the song that you led first. God is a mighty God. He's a consuming fire in the last verse here. I'm going to go ahead and invite you to stand, and I'm going to read this text. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 18 through 29. For ye are not come into the mount that might be touched, and that burned with fire, nor into blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words, which voice that they heard entreated that the word should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure that which was commanded, and if so much as a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned, or thrust through with a dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. But ye are come into Mount Zion, and into the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn which are written in heaven, and to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of men made perfect, and to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. See that ye refuse not him that speaketh, for if they escaped not who refused him that spake on earth, much more shall not we escape, if we turn away from that which speaketh from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he hath promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. This is the word, yet once more, signifieth the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Wherefore we receive a kingdom which cannot be moved. Let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably, with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. You may be seated. The two main themes that I'm looking at here, the impossibility of pleasing God outside of the new covenant, and an exhortation to embrace the fullness of the new covenant in spite of potentially painful discipline and pruning that God necessarily does in our lives, as we learned about in the first part of chapter 12. This section of this chapter opens up with, as I said, the terribleness of God, the picture that you get there of God as he met with Moses inside of the children of Israel. It was too much for them. It was more than Moses wanted to hear the voice of God. The finality, the intensity there that they experienced, they begged to not have that again. Because the reality of God, the reality of His holiness is so severe, it's so final, that in our brokenness we simply cannot contend with that. There's no way for us to deal with the gulf that is opened up there with our brokenness and God's holiness. Verse 20 says, they could not endure that which was commanded. There was no way for them to meet the holiness that was demanded by the old covenant, and it was not intended that they satisfy that holiness. That it was intended as a schoolmaster, both for their benefit and for ours, to help us understand the sinfulness of sin, the brokenness that we are dealing with in our lives. God commanded them that even if so much as a beast touched the mountain, an animal, a dumb animal, implying that even when things not intending to rebel against God, just an accidental breaking of God's order was also enough for death. And to drive the point home even deeper at a communal level, they were supposed to kill the animal. So they was supposed to take on the action of judgment, declaring the seriousness of this. It also implied a separation there that the old covenant understanding brought about. God was simply too holy to be approached by sinful man, and it's because he was. Without the bridge of Jesus crucified, we still would have that separation from God. The Old Testament saints could look forward and trust in that happening, and they could have a relationship with God, I believe, through that. But it was only through a forward-looking faith. Down to verse 24, that's Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, the blood of sprinkling. It was his life that purchased the righteousness that we can take on under the new covenant. His blood spoke better things than that of Abel. Some of the details here, when New Testament teachings refer back to the Old Testament, it gives you an opportunity to get refamiliarized with those stories. I had to look into that story and study it a bit. There was several things that stuck out. Cain and Abel both sacrificed to God. Abel's sacrifice was accepted. Cain's sacrifice was not, and that's where I really got this picture. God responded to Cain and in an inviting way. And he basically invited Cain to look inward, to accept responsibility for his sacrifice not being sufficient. And it doesn't give us any indication, as far as I can tell, as to what the insufficiency of his sacrifice was. Knowing the nature of man, it probably was at a heart level. He was probably checking a box. He was probably doing something so God would do something for him, making God be his servant. But since I wasn't there, I can't say that definitively. But it was his response to God that really set how that unfolded. His response to God was basically to complain that it was the rest of the world that was wrong, not his sacrifice. That's really what his response boiled down to. And God told him that he had a very colorful depiction of how sin was crouching at Cain's door, by Cain not accepting this reality that his brokenness, that his sacrifice did not have the purity that God needed, that God wanted. And it was fascinating to understand that God really was inviting Cain to a place of repentance, a place of reconciliation there, even in the Old Testament. But Cain rejected that. God said sin was crouching, waiting to devour. And Cain leaned into that. He leaned into that rejection of the reality of his brokenness, and it created a level of resentment that completely consumed him. That sin took him over to the point that he committed the first murder, killed his brother. And I believe based on looking at that story, he killed his brother purely because his brother was a reminder to him of his brokenness, and he couldn't handle that that was, he was not going to accept that. He was not going to let that stand. His rebellion against God, against reality, was to such a degree that he had to kill Cain to eliminate that mirror that reflected badly on him. That the old covenant reality there, he did not at that time, he did not have a sacrifice that could atone for that. He was lost. He had nothing to look forward to on this earth. He even complained to God that he would be killed. It said in the text that Abel's blood cried for vengeance, which is the contrast that we have of Jesus' blood that speaketh better things than the blood of Abel. Abel's blood cried for vengeance. It was a judgment against Cain. Jesus' blood is a sacrifice, an offering of righteousness for us. See that you refuse not him that speaketh, for if they escape not who refused him that spake on earth, much more shall we not escape. If we turn away from that which speaketh from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now promised, saying, Yet once more will I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. If we refuse that new covenant, the new covenant did not end the old covenant, it completed the old covenant. If we reject the completion of that old covenant, we're putting ourselves back under, if we reject the completion of it, we put ourselves back under the old covenant. If we reject Jesus' blood, if we reject everything that it is communicating here, if we reject the idea that it's us that's sinful, it's us that's broken, not the rest of the world, not God, we can accept that. We can accept that new covenant. That is the process of accepting it. But if we reject that, if we are comfortable in our sin, if we conclude that we're good enough, we reject the new covenant. We say we're okay, and we bring the old covenant judgment on ourselves. When I was reading verse 27, I was thinking about just the process of preparing for a message. It says the things that are shaken, as of things that are made, those things which cannot be shaken may remain. This is a bit of an analogy. It's certainly not a direct interpretation of what's being said, but as I prepare for a message, I always find out that there's things that I thought we was going to, what I thought we was going to be going, what I was going to be saying. These things get shook loose, and then there's other things that remain because you realize you had the wrong perceptions about what the Bible said. It's scary when you look at just a little passage and you find different things that you're like, wait, I was about ready to interpret that wrongly until God straightened it out. I feel like I go through that process at every message, and I fear that. I know it's coming, and I fear that it's frustrating, really, to me, dealing with that aspect of it. Once I actually get in it, I enjoy it. It's fun, and yet when I'm looking forward to it, the flesh, for some reason, really just don't want to go through that. Even something so minor and something that I've had plenty of experience, I know it's not bad. I know it don't hurt. It's freeing. It's a good thing to have your understanding improved or sharpened, or sometimes just your memory updated when you lose too much of your memory too young, as I do, or as I seem to be. It's good just to have your memory updating, and yet I find this recurring theme that I tend to fear the pain more. The fear of the pain is more of a problem than the actual pain. God God's grace is a balm to the pain that comes from the growth. But the fear of it, there's no balm for that fear when we hang on to that. It's pointing towards what the text is actually teaching now. It's pointing towards the coming judgment, where everything will be shaken in earth and in the heavens. And the things that can be shaken will be removed, and that will leave only that which remains. That which remains is the kingdom that those under the new covenant will receive. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. So in conclusion, I want to give the outline again, the two themes: the impossibility of pleasing God outside of the new covenant. We've seen that with being reminded of how God dealt with people in the Old Testament, the children of Israel. An exhortation to embrace the fullness of the new covenant in spite of potentially painful discipline and pruning that we, as I said, that we learned about in the first half of this chapter. So with that, the conclusion: we can aim higher, I'm going to reread that, working to surrender my sinful impulse. It's not what makes me whole. It's simply a proper response to God's grace and a living confession that I am sinful, as opposed to making myself comfortable in my sin, implying that I am fine. It's the rest of reality that needs to conform to my brokenness. And we'll have a song.